Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second part of the cardiovascular system unit, the heart. So hopefully after the first round, you learned about veins and arteries and various kinds of disorders, and you learned about blood pressure. So that was in the first part. Now we're up to the heart. As you know from learning about the blood vessels, there are veins and arteries, and the whole system is what is known as a closed system, which means that it's not open. If it's open, you have a cut, and you'll bleed a little bit. If it's open a lot, well, then you may bleed to death, but let's hope that that doesn't happen. So it's a closed system where you have a pump known as your heart, and that is what moves your blood. We learned about Starling's law last time, so now we'll talk more about the actual heart. The heart has one job, obviously, to pump blood, and the functions of the whole system are to deliver oxygen and nutrients and then bring back the carbon dioxide and other waste materials back to their appropriate filter, whether it is the lungs or liver or the kidneys or whatever. So nutrients and oxygen to the cells, bring back carbon dioxide and other waste products. The heart itself is about the size of your fist, so think about bowling up your fist. It is hollow and it is cone-shaped. A lot of people kind of draw a heart like that, but it's not quite like that. You'll see where it looks like. We'll see what it looks like in a second. And it's a little bit less than a pound. So a pound, in case you don't know, has 16 ounces. So it's less than 16 ounces. It is in the middle, kind of your chest. A lot of people put their hand over their left side to kind of, when they do the pledge, it's not quite all the way on the left, but it is slightly kind of tilted a little bit, and we'll talk about that. And it is flanked by the lungs, and it is found in your thoracic cavity, which we learned back in the first chapter. And it's going to have what is known as an apex, and it's going to have what is known as a base. Now, here's what's a little crazy. The base is actually the top of your heart, and the apex is actually the point. So you'll see that the apex points towards your left hip, and it rests on a muscle known as the diaphragm. The large portion of the heart, which is the top, is the base. I know that sounds weird, but that's the way it is. And it's right around your second rib. It is enclosed in something known as a pericardium. It's a double sac. Its job is to help reduce friction as your heart beats. So it's near frictionless. It has a serous fluid. We learned about that when we talked about body cavities also back in the membrane, cutaneous membrane, and serous and all that membrane section. So the slippery fluid is called serous fluid, and it does allow the heart to beat in hopefully a nearly frictionless environment. You hope. So there's your heart, and remember that if this person is looking at you, this is their left side, and this is their right side. And I know that seems silly since it's obviously opposite when you're looking at it, but there's your base up there, and there's your apex right there. So you can see it's labeled. You're going to also notice there that some of the vessels are red and some are blue. The blue ones are going to denote veins. Remember, blood's not blue, but denote veins, and these guys are going to denote arteries. That happens to be the aorta, but we'll talk more about them as we go. There it is. You can see it sitting in your chest cavity, and again, it's slightly to your left side. That's your right side. So the heart is muscular, and it has layers, like everything else we learned. Epi usually means outside or around, and that's your outer layer of connective tissue. That's what keeps your heart muscle and everything, together, if you will. Myo usually means middle, and in the heart, that is going to be what is known as cardiac muscle. We learned about that in the muscular system chapter, and the cardiac muscle is only found in the heart. And then the inner layer, where the blood is going to basically be passing, is known as the endocardium. So epi, myo, and endo, just like all the other times we learned that. Now, this heart diagram you will see on your test, and in the old days you would have drawn it on a card, but you don't have to do that now. But I'm going to draw the blood in kind of two fashions. I'm going to use a straight line because I can't change colors on this, and I'm going to use a squiggly line. The straight line is going to be low oxygen blood, and the squiggly is going to be high oxygen blood. Oops. So, the blood has to return from your body. So your body, let's say, is over here. Now, when the blood is in your body, it's going to have given up its oxygen and is going to pick up carbon dioxide. So therefore, it's going to be low in oxygen. So I'm going to draw this as a solid line. It's going to enter either number 2, or it's going to come in the bottom, number 8. 2 and 8 are the same thing. They are your vena cava. Now, they could be superior, or inferior, but 2 and 8 are your vena cava. And that is pretty much the most deoxygenated blood you have. It's going to enter chamber number 5. And chamber number 5 is going to be known as your right atrium. And atrium are what are known as receiving chambers. So it's receiving blood from somewhere, from your body. It's then going to drop through a valve, and it's going to enter into, this is going to be called, we'll keep it simple, this is going to be known as an AV valve. We'll talk more about valves in a second. But an AV valve is going to be between the atrium and what is now, number 7, the right ventricle. Now, the right ventricle is going to be a pumping chamber. So the next stop, it's going to leave your heart, and it's going to exit out of either 9 or, and this is kind of three-dimensional, so you got to kind of bear with me here, or out of 3. 9 and 3 are both known as your pulmonary artery. Now, you say to yourself, wait a second, I learned that arteries are always full of oxygenated blood. Well, they are, except for this one. Arteries always go away from your heart, so that's why this is an artery. But the pulmonary artery gets an asterisk because it is the only artery with deoxygenated blood. And I'm going to put over here for number 3, this is also a pulmonary artery. Now, what's going to happen is that blood is going to go to your lungs. Well, what's going to happen in your lungs? It's going to pick up oxygen. It's then going to return to the heart to be pumped to the body. So now I'm going to use squiggly lines because now you have high oxygenated blood. Number 10 and number 4 are known as your pulmonary veins. Now, veins have typically deoxygenated blood, except for these, and veins always do return to the heart, so that's why they're technically veins. Now, there are 4 of them. There's 2 on the left, and there are 2 on the right, pulmonary vein. But I'm just going to, for simplicity purposes, use only the ones on the right. They're then going to enter number 11, which is going to be the left atrium. Oh, man, I hate when it does that. Left atrium. And again, that's a receiving chamber, so it's going to receive blood from your lungs. It's then going to drop through another AV valve, and that's called the atrioventricular valves. So that's why they're AV valves. It's then going to drop into the left ventricle. Now, this left ventricle is very, very, very strong. It has a very thick muscular walls. It's going to pump that oxygenated blood out of this top arc-looking vessel known as the aorta. So number 1 is the aorta. Now that blood is going to go to your entire body. So that's the heart labeled, and we'll see more of it coming up. So let's talk about it. The 4 chambers of the heart, the left and right are separate because one is going to pump to the lungs and one is going to pump to the body. Atria or atrium, however you want to say it, these guys are your receiving chambers, and they're going to take their blood from the body or the lungs. And then the ventricles are going to be these pumps, basically. And they're going to either pump blood to the lungs or to the body out of the aorta. So the ventricles will get their blood only from the atria. Okay, only, that's it. So they pump it to either the lungs or the body, but they can only get the blood from the atrium. Either they get it from the left or from the right, if you remember the picture. There are 4 valves. There are what are known as the bicuspid and the tricuspid valve, and these guys are your AV valves. They're located between the atrium and the ventricle. And then you have these semilunar valves that are going to be on the way out of the heart. So the pulmonary valve is found at the pulmonary artery on the way to the lungs. And the aortic valve is found on the aorta on the way out to the body. Valves, just like in veins, only one direction of blood flow. You don't want it pooling, and you do not want it going backwards or mixing in your heart. That would be very inefficient. So, oops, got a little typo there. The valves open, blood pumps through. Pretty simple. The valves are held in place by the cordae tendineae, otherwise known as the heartstrings. So you may have heard the term, oh man, that scene tugs at your heartstrings. They're basically just these fibers that hold the valves in place. And again, valves do one thing for the 10 millionth time, prevent backflow. And there they are. So you have your tricuspid valve over here, which you don't need to know that. Your bicuspid valve over here. You have your pulmonary valve over here, and you have your aortic valve over here. But again, you're not going to need to know those. Just wanted you to see them. What I did want you to see, it may come up later, but look at how thick the left ventricle has its muscular walls. So these thick muscular walls are important because they're pumping blood to the whole body. If you look at the right ventricle, the muscular thickness is much thinner because, again, it's only pumping to the lungs, which, again, are really not that far away. This here, we'll skip over that. You're not going to need that. Okay, so let's talk about 3 kinds of circulation. You have what is known as, we're going to learn about pulmonary circulation, coronary circulation, and systemic circulation. So in pulmonary circulation, this is when you see pulmonary or you go to a pulmonologist, you're thinking heart and lungs. That's the thing you're thinking when you see pulmonary. So pulmonary circulation is just that. It is going between the heart and the lungs. Deoxygenated blood is going to go to the lungs. When it's in there, it's going to pick up some oxygen. It's going to return to the heart, and the heart's going to pump it throughout the body. Beautiful system. That's your pulmonary circulation. Heart and lungs. Here's a more, fancy, colorful picture of the one I drew earlier, but there's everybody all labeled up. Nothing new. And you may see the word mitral valve there. That is a bicuspid AV valve. But again, you're not going to need to know that. And then this one over here is your tricuspid valve. Again, give you a blank heart. If these were our notes, you would be able to fill in and practice that. But we're not going to do that here because we already did it once. Now, systemic circulation is basically going through the system, aka your body. So that is the blood that will leave from the aorta, and then by the time it does its thing all the way in your body, it returns to the vena cava. That is systemic circulation. It goes through your whole body, where it leaves very high in oxygen, and when it returns, it's very low in oxygen. And it'll go through the heart and lungs and fill back up and be pumped out. And again, it's a beautiful thing. So here's your systemic. There is your heart. There's your body. That's your systemic. There's your lungs. That's your coronary. Now, the one thing we kind of forgot is, what about your heart itself? Well, the heart itself, we're going to learn about in a second, has something called coronary circulation. But here's your systemic as a review. Your aorta is going to leave from the left ventricle out to the body. Your vena cava is going to return from the body. That is your systemic. Your pulmonary arteries are going to go to the lungs, and your pulmonary veins are going to return from the lungs. So these guys are pulmonary circulation. So that's going to everywhere in your body somewhere, whether it's your lungs or whether it's your muscles or your stomach, whatever. It's going somewhere. We can't forget our general rule with the pulmonary circulation that arteries carry oxygenated blood all the time, with the exception, that was a little star I put before, pulmonary arteries. They leave the heart, so they're arteries, but they are deoxygenated. All veins carry deoxygenated blood back to the heart, exception pulmonary vein, and that's going to carry oxygenated blood actually from the lungs back to the heart. So, again, general rule with exceptions. Coronary circulation is to the heart muscle. Now, many of you may have thought that if the heart itself has 4 chambers and they're always filled up with blood, that's where the heart muscle gets its blood from. And again, it seems reasonable, but it's not quite the case. So if this is your heart, again, which is showing a very simple heart, it's kind of spider webbed over with these arteries that look like that. And those are your coronary arteries that are going to bring blood to the actual heart muscle. Well, sometimes they get clogged, and if they get clogged, you may have what is known as a heart attack. And that's because the heart muscle's not getting the nutrients and the oxygen in the blood, so it begins to, in some cases, die, and then when it stops pumping, the person could potentially die. Now, luckily, there's been a lot of advances in heart surgery and heart things, so many people do survive. But it is possible that you can die immediately from a heart attack. And just like coronary arteries, there has to be cardiac veins that are going to bring the blood back. So here's what they look like. As the blood is leaving your aorta, which it would do there's a couple of little branches right there, and these guys go to your heart. Now, if there's a block somewhere, let's say there's a block there, let's just say, well, everywhere past that, let's say this entire area, is not going to get blood. So if that happens, then the muscles aren't going to work, they're not going to pump, aka heart attack. Here's a fancier picture, but once again, you can see they originate from the same spot right at the base of the aorta, and they travel out, and there's many names, obviously, but there's 4 major coronary arteries. So what the heck is a heart attack? Well, we kind of just said it, that when your heart muscle doesn't get nutrients or oxygen or whatever, it could be damaged or die. And when that happens, your heart can't beat anymore and you are starting to suffer a heart attack. In most cases, it's kind of like a slow onset where you may have arm pain or you may have the chills or you may be sweating or whatever. And both my dad and my uncle had this scenario when they were at work, and luckily people they work with noticed the signs and brought them to the hospital, and they both survived because of really good heart doctors. So that's what's kind of nice. And here's the blockage. It could be a plaque or some sort of blockage. And what happens there, if you look here, there's no blood. And no blood means that the tissue is going to die, and that's bad. And you can see here in this case, there's your dead tissue right there. So we want to avoid that if you can. So eat healthy. Well, you can either have heart surgery, which is possible, or you get lucky and you avoid surgery by getting what is known as a stent. Now, a stent, I'll show you a picture in a second, is this kind of almost like a metal kind of spring thing. And what it does is it goes into your vessels and it expands. And they're tiny. I mean, that's the tip of someone's finger, but they are brought in through your major arteries. Usually they go in through your leg. They come on up right through your midsection, through your descending aorta, right into where that blockage could be. And if it works out, there's your plaque or your blockage. They send in the stent, which again is small. Then opens up with the help of a balloon. They pull the balloon out, and there's your stent, hopefully preventing blockage. And again, that's what my dad had. My uncle, unfortunately, did have heart surgery. But again, they're both around still. And again, my dad, they went in through here and through his leg, and then they travel up through your descending aorta and right in your aorta, boop, right to your heart. There is a way that you could get in through your arm, but this is a thinner vessel, so your leg is usually a little bit easier, and it's actually pretty direct, as silly as that sounds. The heart itself can beat by itself, basically, which is kind of cool. It needs to be started, and you have this kind of nodal intrinsic conduction system that kind of ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And if your heart stops and you happen to be near a defibrillator or an AED machine, or what you're going to see in a second in the next picture, clear charge to 100 like you see on the doctor shows, that would be the electric charge that can restart your heart. Now, again, you don't want to see this guy coming at you. You want to have heart problems when this thing gets zapped on you, because if you're well and you get zapped, it could actually do the opposite and stop your heart. So, it's no fun messing around with electricity like that. And you're going to have, you guys may have heard of this thing known as a pacemaker, and you have one built in. And in the event that you have some trouble with that in your life, you can get in a fake pacemaker or whatever, an artificial pacemaker. And what that does is when it picks up irregular heartbeats, it kind of sends like a little electrical shock and kind of straightens everything out. Because remember, your heart likes to beat in this nice ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And the pacemaker keeps an eye on that. And you may see these Purkinje fibers. You'll see them in a picture coming up in a second. And they're kind of going to spread out and let your heart do its thing. So there's your nodes or your pacemaker. And then you can see them here, these they look kind of like yellow, pathways or something. Those are your Purkinje fibers, and they're going to help this heart contraction. And again, you're not going to need this diagram, but there's a cycle that happens known as your cardiac cycle. And the cardiac cycle is the events that happen in one complete heartbeat. And again, I told you numbers between 60 and 80 anywhere. This particular slide has 75 beats per minute as an average. And again, you're probably somewhere around there. And what happens is the atria contract. They're going to let the blood go into the ventricles. Then, as the atria relax, the ventricles contract, and they're going to send their blood either to the heart or to the body, depending on what chamber the blood is in. And that ba-boom, 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 that happens, pretty much for your whole life. Then we have as you remember, the diastolic and systolic numbers. And your systole or systolic is the contraction. And we said normal or a good number would be around 120. And your relaxation or your diastole or diastolic number is around, let's call it 80, 70, something like that. That would be a pretty decent heart blood pressure. Now, the cardiac cycle is the events of one complete heartbeat. So you're not going to need to, get hung up in all this. So don't let that get you crazy. But that's what is known as the cardiac cycle. And from there, you can figure out what is known as cardiac output. And cardiac output is a simple math problem. So let's say, for example, I'm making this up, that your heart rate is 60 beats per minute, let's just say. And every time your heart beats, it moves 100 milliliters of blood. What would the cardiac output be? And it would be simply 60 times 100, or 6,000 milliliters. And that happens in a minute. So your cardiac output. If you are huffing and puffing and you are running a marathon and this number goes up to, let's say, 160, the stroke volume, we said, does not change. So now you go up to 16,000 milliliters. And as you increase your heart rate, you increase your cardiac output. But remember, the stroke volume does not change very much. Whatever yours is, it's pretty much going to be, unless you have major heart issues or you somehow develop unbelievable heart strength through crazy amounts of exercise. And this here is, again, you're not going to need to know this, but it's a little how everything all works together. So hopefully that was helpful. And there'll be some questions that will accompany this. And there'll be a project on the heart this Friday. So stay safe, everyone, and I will see you very soon.